My family locked me out in the freezing snow on Christmas Eve, claiming my failure energy would ruin their fancy corporate dinner. My father told me to take $100 bill and buy a burger because I would never amount to anything. Months later, photos of me being honored at the biggest business summit of the year went viral. When their company collapsed and they came begging for my help, I just smiled and asked, "Where were you that Christmas?" If you have ever been treated like the black sheep of your family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you know the best revenge is massive success. The heavy oak door swung open a fraction wider, and the harsh ambient light from the foyer spilled out onto the snow-covered porch. Marcus stepped into the frame. My father. He was a man who commanded every room he entered, the esteemed founder and chief executive officer of Legacy Logistics. He stood tall in a custom-tailored tuxedo holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. I braced myself instinctively, expecting the standard, albeit stiff, holiday greeting. A nod, perhaps a brief, obligatory hug. Instead, his eyes swept over me with a chilling clinical detachment. He looked at my simple wool coat, a practical garment that clearly lacked a designer label, and then his gaze dropped to the sweet potato pie in my freezing hands. He let out a sharp, audible scoff that cut through the winter wind. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply looked at the $100 bill still fluttering in my sister Chloe's outstretched hand and nodded in agreement. "Take the money and buy a burger, Maya," he commanded, his deep voice carrying the exact same tone he used when firing subordinate employees. "Go find a diner that is open late. We are hosting major institutional investors tonight, people who can actually secure the future of this family and this company. I cannot have you sitting at my dining table looking like a neighborhood charity case. Your failure energy is going to ruin the entire corporate mood we have spent weeks curating." The sheer cruelty of his words struck my chest, but they were tragically familiar. This was the man who had spent my entire life measuring my worth by my bank account and my job title, finding me severely lacking every single time. I was the stain on his perfect corporate family portrait. Before I could formulate a response to my own father calling me a charity case on Christmas Eve, Preston decided to chime in. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, the ice clinking loudly in the tense silence. Preston always loved to rub his privilege in my face. He leaned against the doorframe, projecting the arrogant confidence of a man who had been handed everything on a silver platter. He was the white son-in-law who had married into a wealthy family and had somehow convinced himself he was the supreme authority on success. "Yeah, Maya," Preston sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "A community college dropout does not exactly fit in with the Ivy League crowd we are entertaining tonight. These are serious people making serious moves. You would just make everyone uncomfortable. Why do you not just take the cash and head home? It is better for everyone this way." I stared at Preston. The sheer audacity of this man standing in my childhood home, lecturing me about education and belonging, ignited a fire in my blood that finally burned away the last remnants of my desire to please them. For years I had kept my mouth shut to keep the peace. For years I had swallowed their insults to maintain some illusion of family. But standing out in the freezing cold while they mocked my education was the final straw. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and locked my eyes directly onto his. I did not yell. I kept my voice dangerously low and steady. "Your Ivy League degree, Preston?" I began articulating every syllable with razor-sharp precision, was paid for using the college fund that my father stole from my personal bank account 10 years ago. "You are literally standing in a house funded by my stolen future drinking liquor, bought with money that should have paid for my tuition. So do not stand there and lecture me about academic pedigree when yours was bought with my blood and sweat." The silence that descended upon the porch was absolute. The background hum of holiday jazz from inside the house suddenly sounded absurdly loud. Preston's smug superior smile vanished instantly, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression of shock. Chloe gasped loudly, taking a stumbling step backward, as if the physical force of the truth had shoved her. My father's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage at having his darkest financial secret exposed right there on the front steps. But before Marcus could unleash his fury, another figure pushed her way to the front of the entryway. It was my mother, Helen. She was draped in heavy silk and pearls, the picture-perfect matriarch who valued neighborhood gossip and country club status above the well-being of her own children. She did not ask what the argument was about. She did not ask why her youngest daughter was standing in a snowstorm holding a pie. She simply saw me challenging the golden couple and reacted with fierce, blind loyalty to her favorites. Without a single word of warning, Helen raised her hand and struck me across the face. The slap was hard, sharp, and echoing. The sting radiated across my left cheek, leaving a burning trail of heat that contrasted violently with the freezing air. "You will never, ever disrespect your brother-in-law in this house," my mother hissed, her eyes wide with a frantic, irrational anger. "You are nothing but a jealous, bitter embarrassment to this family. You have always been nothing. Just take the money and get out of our sight before you ruin this night completely." I stood frozen on the porch for a long, heavy moment. The physical pain of the slap was nothing compared to the profound, hollow realization that I truly had no family left in that house. I looked at the crisp $100 bill still pinched between my sister's trembling, perfectly manicured fingers. I looked at my mother's chest, heaving with misplaced anger. I looked at my father, who watched the entire scene with cold, approving detachment. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream or beg or demand an apology. I simply opened my frozen hands. The heavy ceramic dish slipped from my grip. The sweet potato pie, baked with hours of misplaced love and desperate hope, crashed onto the icy stone porch. The dish shattered into dozens of jagged pieces, sending the warm, cinnamon-spiced filling splattering violently across Preston's expensive designer shoes. I did not wait to see their horrified reactions. I turned my back on the massive, brightly lit mansion and walked away into the dark winter night, the snow crunching beneath my boots. I walked past the line of luxury cars parked along the street, rounding the corner of the exclusive gated neighborhood. Just out of sight from my family's pristine property, a sleek black chauffeur-driven Maybach sat idling in the shadows. The driver stepped out instantly, opening the heavy rear door for me and silently handing me a warm, damp towel for my face as I slid into the heated, leather-scented interior. The moment the door closed, sealing me in absolute quiet, my encrypted cell phone began to vibrate. I answered it immediately, wiping the melting snow from my hair. "Boss," my lead legal counsel said through the speaker, her voice buzzing with barely contained excitement. "The final wire transfers just cleared the system. We successfully bought out 80% of Legacy Logistics' corporate debt from their primary lenders. We own them." I leaned back against the plush leather headrest, feeling the warmth return to my stinging cheek, and let a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. "Excellent," I replied smoothly, watching the snow fall through the tinted glass. "Prepare the noose." The heavy door of the Maybach closed, sealing me in a quiet, leather-scented sanctuary that felt a million miles away from the freezing porch and the stinging red mark on my cheek. I let out a long, slow breath, watching the snow accumulate on the tinted privacy glass. The transition from the pathetic, struggling daughter to my true self was instantaneous. I shrugged off the cheap, fraying wool coat I wore specifically for these family visits, tossing it onto the opposite seat. My driver adjusted the rearview mirror, his eyes reflecting quiet concern, but he knew better than to ask. He simply handed me a steaming towel from the heated console. I pressed it against my face, wiping away the lingering chill of the snow and the burning residue of my mother's slap. When I lowered the towel, the woman looking back in the darkened reflection of the window was not the community college dropout my family so deeply despised. She was a predator who had just smelled blood in the water. I reached into the hidden compartment beneath the armrest and pulled out my tablet. The screen illuminated the dim cabin with a cold blue glow, instantly connecting to the secure servers of Obsidian Holdings. I tapped past the dual-factor authentication and opened the master portfolio. There it was. Legacy Logistics. The company my father had built from the ground up, the company he constantly used as a weapon to prove his superiority, was bleeding out on my screen, and they had absolutely no idea that the knife was in my hand. I swiped through the quarterly financial reports, my eyes tracking the bright red downward trends. It was worse than I had initially projected. Preston, the golden boy, the Ivy League financial genius who had just mocked my education, was running the company straight into the ground with a level of arrogance that bordered on comical. I zoomed in on the ledger, tracing his horrific missteps. He had taken massive high-interest loans against the company's core assets to fund a reckless expansion into a market he clearly knew nothing about. He was making aggressive, unhedged bets on outdated supply chain models, completely ignoring the technological shifts in the industry. He operated with the blind confidence of a mediocre man who had never been told no in his entire life, protected by the heavy shield of his privilege, and my father's desperate need to have a son-in-law who looked the part at the country club. I tapped the screen, connecting a secure video call to my executive team. Within seconds, the faces of my 3 top lieutenants appeared. Sarah, my brilliant chief operating officer David, my relentless head of acquisitions, and Elena, my lead forensic accountant. They were my chosen family. People who respected my mind, trusted my instincts, and never once questioned my worth. Boss Sarah said, her voice crisp and alert despite the late hour. "We saw the debt acquisition clear. How was the family dinner?" I poured myself a measure of sparkling water from the chilled console. "I did not make it past the front door," I replied evenly. "They told me my failure energy would ruin their corporate mood." On the screen, David shook his head in disgust while Elena typed furiously on her keyboard. "Their loss," David muttered. "Give the word, Maya. We are ready to move on the next phase." I pulled up the itemized expense reports Elena had managed to extract during our due diligence phase. "I want to accelerate the foreclosure," I instructed, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I want the timeline cut in half. Do not wait for the standard 30-day grace period. They are in breach of a dozen covenants on this debt already. I want the notice of default finalized and ready to serve." Elena leaned closer to her camera. "You are sure you want to pull the trigger this fast? We could let them dig a deeper hole." "They are not just digging a hole, Elena," I said, sending the expense reports to their screens. "They are treating the company like a personal piggy bank, and they are running out of coins. Look at line item 42. Preston expensed a $200,000 luxury sports car as a fleet vehicle. Look at line item 89. Chloe's silk designer dress she was wearing tonight, charged to the corporate promotional account. My father's private country club memberships, my mother's spa retreats, all cleverly disguised as client entertainment and operational costs. They are bleeding the remaining capital dry to fund their lifestyle while defaulting on their vendors. They are stealing from their own employees to maintain an illusion of wealth. If we wait, there will be nothing left to salvage." The team nodded in unison, their faces hardening with professional resolve. "We will have the default notices drafted by midnight," Sarah confirmed. "They will be legally cornered before the week is out." We ended the call, and I leaned my head back against the seat, the reality of what I was doing settling over me. I was about to dismantle my own father's empire. I was about to strip away the false superiority that Preston and Chloe wore so proudly. But there was no guilt. My family had made their choices. They had chosen to view me as worthless, as a stepping stone to be trampled on. They had chosen to steal my future to fund their present. Now they were going to learn that the universe demands balance, and the bill had finally come due. My private assistant, who had been sitting quietly in the front passenger seat, turned around and slid open the privacy partition. She held a thick, beautifully textured envelope in her hands. It had arrived at the private office just before she came to pick me up. "This came by secure courier, Maya," she said, handing the heavy envelope backward. I slid my finger under the gold wax seal and pulled out a thick card with embossed silver lettering. It was an official invitation from the board of the Global Venture Capitalist Summit, the most prestigious financial event in New York. I scanned the elegant text, my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm. They want you to be the keynote speaker this year, my assistant said, a proud smile breaking across her face. The board directors were blown away by the Obsidian portfolio. They want you to share your acquisition strategies with the entire industry. But they also made it very clear. They want the faceless CEO to step into the light. It is time to drop the anonymity, Maya. No more shadows. I looked at the invitation, feeling the heavy, expensive paper between my fingertips. For years, I had built my wealth behind the curtain of corporate holding companies and non-disclosure agreements. I had hidden my face to avoid the very prejudice and dismissal my family had thrown at me tonight. I had let my numbers speak for themselves. But hiding was a trauma response. Hiding was what you did when you believed you were not supposed to take up space. I reached for the chilled bottle of vintage champagne waiting in the ice bucket. I poured a small amount into a crystal flute, the golden bubbles catching the dim light of the cabin. I thought about my father telling me I would never amount to anything. I thought about my mother slapping my face. I thought about Preston laughing at my education. Confirm the invitation, I told my assistant, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying certainty. Tell them the CEO of Obsidian Holdings accepts. I took a slow sip of the champagne, the cold liquid matching the ice in my veins. Let us show them who the real shark is. 3 months later, the air in my private spa suite was thick with the scent of eucalyptus and lavender. I lay face down on the heated massage table, listening to the soft ambient music playing from the hidden speakers. For the first time in 90 days, I was forcing myself to disconnect from the screens, the markets, and the relentless pace of building my empire. My lead therapist was working the tension out of my shoulders, a physical manifestation of the stress I had carried since that freezing Christmas Eve on my parents' porch. But peace is a rare luxury when you share DNA with people who thrive on chaos. From the pocket of my silk robe hanging nearby, my personal cell phone began to vibrate. It was not a single notification. It was a continuous aggressive buzzing that rattled against the mahogany hanger. My therapist paused, asking if I needed to take the call. I hesitated. Very few people had that private number, and none of them would blow it up unless it was a matter of national security. I slipped off the table, wrapping the heavy silk robe around myself, and picked up the device. The screen was flooded with notifications from a group chat I had silenced and buried at the bottom of my messages. The Legacy Family Chat. For 3 entire months, they had not sent me a single text. Not a belated Merry Christmas, not a Happy New Year, not even a casual inquiry to see if I had frozen to death after they locked me out in the snow. Total absolute radio silence until today. I unlocked the screen and watched the messages pour in real time. My mother, Helen, was firing off texts with frantic, desperate energy. Maya, explain this right now. What is this? Is this some kind of sick joke? Answer your phone. Call your father immediately. Attached to her barrage of demands was a high-resolution screenshot. It was the digital cover of Forbes magazine, which had officially launched online 10 minutes ago. There I was, front and center. I was wearing a stunning, impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than my sister's entire wedding dress. My hair was styled perfectly, my expression cool and unyielding. In my hands, I held the Crystal Trophy for Venture Capitalist of the Year, awarded at the largest tech and finance summit in New York, just 48 hours prior. The bold white text across the cover read, "Maya, the Silent Shark Reshaping Wall Street." The secret was out. The anonymity I had carefully maintained to build my wealth without interference had been deliberately stripped away. I wanted them to see it. I wanted the world to see it. I scrolled down, watching my family mentally short-circuit as their deeply ingrained delusions clashed violently with reality. Chloe chimed in next, her texts dripping with her trademark toxic jealousy. Did you pay a photographer to mock this up, Maya? This is pathetic even for you. Who did you sleep with to get your face on a fake magazine cover? You are embarrassing the family name. Take this down before Dad's investors see it. It was almost funny how their brains simply refused to process the truth. They were so committed to the narrative of me being the worthless dropout that they genuinely believed a global financial publication was a Photoshop prank. Then came Preston, the white knight of the family, the arrogant chief financial officer who had squandered my father's money while lecturing me about my worth. His text popped up confirming exactly the kind of privileged, mediocre man he truly was. "Relax, Chloe," Preston wrote into the group chat, his words oozing with smug superiority. It is obviously a diversity quota PR stunt. Some guilt-ridden tech bro probably needed a minority female face to slap on a brochure for an inclusion award tax write-off. Do not give her the attention she is begging for, Helen. She does not have actual money. She is still the same broke community college failure begging for our leftovers. Do not let her ruin our morning. I stood in the center of the spa suite staring at Preston's message. He was so completely blinded by his own arrogance, so insulated by the false superiority my parents had handed him, that he could not recognize the executioner standing right in front of him. He truly believed his pedigree protected him from consequences. He believed the world operated exactly as my father's household did, where his mediocrity was celebrated and my brilliance was punished. I did not type a single word in response. I did not need to defend myself. I did not need to hurl insults or prove my net worth through a text message. I simply poured myself a glass of cucumber water, took a slow sip, and waited. Because right at that exact moment, 3,000 miles away, in their pristine gated community, a black delivery van was pulling up to the long, sweeping driveway of Marcus's mansion. I knew this because my lead attorney was tracking the courier via GPS, sending me a secondary stream of silent updates to my secure work phone. While Preston was busy typing out his racist classist insults into a family group chat, the heavy brass knocker on my father's front door was echoing through their grand foyer. My father, Marcus, would be annoyed by the interruption. He would likely yell at a housekeeper to get the door expecting a delivery of expensive wine, or perhaps a gift from a corporate vendor. But the courier would insist on a direct signature from the CEO of Legacy Logistics. Marcus would stomp to the door, snatch the clipboard, and sign his name with an angry flourish. He would tear open the thick certified envelope bearing the gold-embossed seal of Obsidian Holdings. He would pull out the heavy legal parchment, expecting a routine communication from his mysterious new debt holders. Instead, Marcus would read the bold capitalized letters at the top of the page: certified notice of default and immediate foreclosure. He would scan the staggering numbers detailing the massive $15 million loan that Preston had assured him was perfectly manageable. He would read the uncompromising legal mandate demanding full payment in exactly 7 days. Not a renegotiation, not a payment plan, a full total liquidation demand. If the $15 million was not wired to Obsidian Holdings within 168 hours, the bank would seize his house, his company, his cars, and his entire legacy. I watched the read receipts on the family group chat suddenly freeze. The frantic texting from Helen stopped. The arrogant insults from Preston vanished mid-sentence. The digital silence was deafening. I could vividly imagine the color draining from my father's face as he read the name of the firm calling in his ruin. I could picture the exact moment the notification reached Preston's phone, alerting the chief financial officer that their corporate lifeline had just been severed. They had no idea that the silent shark smiling at them from the cover of Forbes magazine was the exact same predator holding the leash around their necks. My phone vibrated one last time. It was a message from my attorney. Delivery confirmed. The clock is ticking. I set the phone face down on the marble counter, slipped my silk robe off my shoulders, and climbed back onto the heated massage table. Let them panic. Let them scramble. The game had finally begun. The live security feed from the Legacy Logistics executive boardroom streamed directly to my tablet. When Obsidian Holdings officially took over their massive $15 million debt portfolio, my legal team immediately exercised our right to full operational oversight. That included unrestricted and silent access to the internal security cameras of their corporate headquarters. I sat in the absolute quiet of my penthouse office, watching the high-definition broadcast with a profound sense of vindication. For my entire life, Marcus had projected an aura of absolute, untouchable control. He was the stoic, commanding patriarch who never broke a sweat and never let emotion cloud his judgment. But right now, inside his massive corner office, The flawless image of my father was completely disintegrating. He was nothing more than a cornered animal realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. The video feed captured him pacing frantically behind his enormous mahogany desk, his face flushed a dark, dangerous red. Preston stood on the opposite side of the room, clutching a leather portfolio to his chest, looking exactly like a child who had just been caught stealing. Chloe was sitting in one of the plush guest chairs, furiously tapping on her phone, no doubt trying to do damage control on the social media gossip that was already spreading about their impending bankruptcy. My father stopped pacing. He looked down at the physical copy of the notice of default, resting on his blotter. The silence in the room was so heavy I could feel it radiating through the screen. Then Marcus snapped. He let out a visceral, booming roar of pure, unhinged rage. He raised both of his arms and violently swept everything off his desk. Dual computer monitors, heavy crystal achievement awards, framed family photographs, and dozens of thick financial binders went crashing to the hardwood floor in a chaotic, deafening cascade of destruction. Chloe shrieked and jumped out of her chair, pressing herself against the window in terror. Preston took a stumbling step backward, dropping his portfolio, but he was not fast enough. Marcus vaulted around the desk and lunged at his golden son-in-law. My father grabbed Preston by the lapels of his custom velvet blazer, lifting him slightly off his feet and slammed him hard against the expensive wood-paneled wall. The camera feed zoomed in, catching the absolute raw terror flashing in Preston's usually arrogant eyes. Marcus pinned him there, his forearm pressing brutally into Preston's chest. "Where is my money, Preston?" My father screamed, his voice echoing through the corporate suite. $15 million is gone. You told me those loans were operational safety nets. You told me the company was more profitable than ever. Where did it go? Preston choked, gasping for air as he tried to pry my father's hands off his expensive jacket. He looked pathetic, entirely stripped of the country club superiority he loved to wear like armor. But even while pinned against a wall by a furious patriarch, Preston could not help but rely on his favorite weapon: gaslighting. He held up his hands in a defensive, placating gesture and immediately began shifting the blame. "Marcus, you need to calm down." Preston choked out, desperately trying to smooth his voice into its usual condescending tone. "This is not a failure of my financial strategy. We are victims of unprecedented macroeconomic headwinds. The entire industry is suffering because of these sudden woke market shifts. The new sustainability regulations disrupted our primary supply chain routes. You cannot blame me for volatile global trends outside of my control." My father pressed his forearm harder into Preston's collarbone. "Do not give me your pathetic business school buzzwords," he growled. "I saw the line items on the default notice. You categorized a $200,000 luxury sports car as a delivery fleet vehicle. You expensed a month-long trip to the Amalfi Coast as client entertainment. You drained the operating capital to fund your lavish lifestyle while neglecting to pay our primary vendors. You stole from my legacy." Before Preston could stutter out another pathetic excuse, Chloe aggressively threw herself into the conflict. She rushed across the office and began pulling frantically at our father's arm, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Let him go right now, Dad!" Chloe shrieked, her face twisted with entitled fury. "Stop attacking my husband. He is a financial visionary, and you are just too stubborn and old-fashioned to understand his methods. Preston has been trying to modernize this dinosaur of a company for years, but you refuse to adapt. This is not his fault. That predatory lending firm is just trying to squeeze us unfairly. They are targeting us because they are jealous of our market share." I watched the screen, letting out a soft laugh. The sheer delusion was staggering. Chloe was fiercely defending the very man who was dragging her into financial ruin, utterly convinced of their collective victimhood. Marcus slowly released his grip, letting Preston slide down the wall. My father looked at his golden daughter and his chosen heir with a mixture of absolute disgust and dawning realization. He was finally seeing them for what they truly were: parasites who had fed on his success until there was nothing left but a hollow shell. Marcus straightened his ruined suit jacket, his breathing heavy and ragged. He pointed a trembling finger at Preston. "You have exactly 1 week to fix this," Marcus warned, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If Obsidian Holdings forecloses on this building, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison for corporate fraud." Preston gasped for air, smoothing down his wrinkled velvet lapels and straightening his silk tie. Even now, standing in the wreckage of the office, he had helped destroy his massive ego, refused to let him admit defeat. He puffed out his chest, summoning a smug, arrogant smile that made my stomach turn. "Relax, Marcus," Preston said, dusting off his sleeve with exaggerated casualness. "I told you I have everything completely under control. You are panicking over nothing. I used my Ivy League alumni network and pulled some major strings this morning. I managed to bypass their legal team and secured an emergency in-person meeting with the CEO of Obsidian Holdings for tomorrow at noon." Preston walked over to the ruined desk and confidently stepped over the shattered glass and broken electronics. "I know exactly how to handle these faceless corporate suits," Preston bragged, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "These venture capitalists are all the same. They just want to feel important. I will walk into that meeting, shake his hand, charm him with our expansion projections, and negotiate a generous extension on the debt. By tomorrow evening, this entire notice of default will be thrown in the trash. Just let me do what I do best." I reached out and paused the security feed, freezing the image of Preston's smug, self-satisfied smile. He was so completely convinced of his own brilliance. He firmly believed he was going to walk into a luxury boardroom tomorrow and manipulate some gullible old billionaire with a firm handshake and a few country club anecdotes. He had absolutely no idea that the ruthless, faceless CEO he was planning to charm was the very same woman he had locked out in the freezing snow and told to buy a burger. I turned off the tablet, allowing the dark screen to reflect my own quiet smile. Tomorrow, I was going to let him dig his own grave, and then I was going to gladly push him inside. The total financial paralysis of legacy logistics did not happen with a loud explosion, but with a terrifying digital silence. It was exactly 48 hours after the notice of default was delivered that the corporate bank accounts were completely frozen. Marcus had been sitting in his home office desperately trying to initiate the weekly payroll transfers for hundreds of employees. Instead of the usual confirmation screen, he was met with bold red banners indicating that the accounts were locked under a federal lien. Obsidian Holdings had systematically enacted the covenants of their debt acquisition, seizing control of all liquid assets. The panic that swept through the multi-million-dollar suburban mansion was palpable. The illusion of their untouchable empire was collapsing in real time, and the reality of imminent ruin was finally setting in. Helen called an emergency family meeting in the grand living room. She paced across the imported Persian rug, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Despite the fact that they were staring at absolute bankruptcy, she was still draped in expensive silk and perfectly applied makeup. She simply refused to process the reality of their situation. For Helen, poverty was a disease that only happened to other people, not to her. She clutched a crumpled copy of Forbes magazine in her manicured hands, gripping it so tightly her knuckles were white. The cover, featuring my face and my title as Venture Capitalist of the Year, was staring back at them. "This is not a catastrophe," Helen announced to the room, her voice echoing with a staggering level of delusion. "This is simply a temporary cash flow issue. We have a solution right here." She threw the magazine onto the glass coffee table, pointing at my face. "Maya has hundreds of millions of dollars. She is the CEO of a major venture capital firm. $5 million is nothing to her. It is pocket change. We will just go to her and tell her to give us the money to hold us over until Preston fixes this mess with the lenders." Preston sat on the leather sofa looking completely hollowed out. His usual arrogant smirk was entirely gone, replaced by a sickly pale sheen of sweat. He had spent the last 2 days calling every Ivy League connection he had, begging for a bridge loan, but the moment anyone heard that Obsidian Holdings had initiated the foreclosure, they hung up the phone. Nobody wanted to cross the silent shark. Preston stared at the magazine cover, unable to reconcile the fact that the community college dropout he had endlessly mocked was the apex predator circling his sinking ship. Chloe paced behind her husband, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The disgust on her face was evident. She hated me with a passion that had defined our entire sibling dynamic. The very idea of asking me for help, of admitting that she needed my money, made her physically sick. "We cannot go begging to Maya." Chloe spat out, her voice trembling with pride. "Do you have any idea how much she will gloat? She is going to hold this over our heads forever. She probably set up this whole magazine interview just to humiliate us." "She is blood," Helen snapped back, her maternal entitlement rising to a fever pitch. "Family takes care of family. Do you think she got to where she is without the strong foundation we provided for her? We built her character. We taught her how to survive. Everything she has is because she is a part of this family. Her wealth is our wealth. It is communal property. She owes us this." The sheer audacity of my mother claiming credit for my success was breathtaking. This was the same woman who had slapped me across the face and told me I was a worthless embarrassment. This was the same family that had stolen my college tuition to fund Preston's education. Yet in their twisted reality, they had somehow convinced themselves that my hard-earned millions were a family asset simply waiting for them to claim it. Marcus, who had been staring blankly at the fireplace, finally nodded. He was a desperate man watching his legacy turn to ash, and he was willing to swallow his pride if it meant saving his corporate throne. "We need that $5 million by tomorrow morning," Marcus said, his voice rough and exhausted. "Or the payroll bounces and the board removes me as chief executive. Find out where she is, Helen." Helen eagerly flipped through the pages of the magazine, scanning the lengthy profile written about my rise in the financial sector. She ignored the paragraphs detailing my rigorous investment strategies, my sleepless nights, and my philanthropic work. Her eyes hunted only for status symbols. There she gasped, tapping her manicured nail against the glossy page. "It says she conducts most of her private business from her primary residence, an ultra-luxury $12 million penthouse in the financial district. It lists the name of the residential tower. We are not calling her. She might not answer. We are going there right now." Within minutes, they piled into Marcus's remaining luxury sport utility vehicle. The drive from their suburban estate to the heart of the city was filled with tense, nervous energy. They were rehearsing their manipulation tactics, preparing the exact blend of guilt and family loyalty they intended to use to extract the money from me. They arrived at the gleaming glass tower that housed my penthouse. It was a modern fortress of steel and privacy, designed specifically to keep unwanted elements out. As they pushed through the revolving doors, the head concierge stepped out from behind the marble security desk. He was a tall, imposing man who knew exactly who belonged in the building and who did not. "May I help you?" the concierge asked politely but firmly, blocking their path to the private elevators. "We are here to see Maya," Helen demanded, projecting her country club authority. "We are her family. Send us up immediately." The concierge did not flinch. "I am sorry, ma'am, but Ms. Maya has not authorized any visitors today. I cannot let you access the private elevator bank without her direct permission. If you would like to leave a message, I can pass it along to her executive assistant." Chloe groaned in frustration, but Helen was not going to be stopped by a lobby employee. Her entitlement completely took over, overriding any sense of public decency. Helen grabbed her chest, her face contorting into a mask of pure theatrical agony. She began to hyperventilate, letting out a loud, desperate sob that echoed through the pristine lobby. "You do not understand," Helen screamed, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "It is my daughter. There has been a terrible accident. It is a life-or-death family medical emergency. Her father is having a heart attack. You have to let us up right now or her father is going to die without seeing her. Please, you have to let us through." The concierge, taken aback by the sudden screaming and the sheer panic of a supposed medical emergency, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. That was all Helen needed. She pushed past the desk, grabbing Marcus by the arm and dragging him toward the private elevator bank. Preston and Chloe sprinted right behind them, slipping into the polished steel cabin just as the doors began to slide shut. As the elevator engaged, shooting them smoothly upward toward my $12 million sanctuary, Helen dropped the panic-stricken mother routine instantly. She straightened her pearls, smoothed her hair, and looked at the digital floor indicator ticking upward. She had bypassed the security. She had breached the fortress. Now she was ready to demand her money. They had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them on the other side of those doors. The quiet hum of our strategic conversation was suddenly shattered by a harsh electronic chime. The heavy brass doors of my private elevator, which opened directly into the center of my sprawling living room, began to slide apart with a soft, mechanical hiss. I paused, setting my crystal champagne flute down on the table. My security team had strict instructions regarding uninvited guests, but I knew exactly who had breached the perimeter the moment I heard my mother's frantic, high-pitched voice echoing through the foyer. They had likely created a massive scene in the lobby, screaming about a life-or-death family medical emergency to bypass the building guards. Helen Marcus. Chloe and Preston stumbled out of the elevator and stepped onto my custom-woven silk rugs. They looked exactly like a group of desperate, panicked refugees who had just washed ashore after a shipwreck. But their frantic, aggressive energy evaporated the absolute second they actually looked around. They stopped completely dead in their tracks. Their mouths fell open and their eyes widened as they took in the sheer staggering scale of my $12 million home. They stared at the original modern art hanging on the pristine walls. They gaped at the sweeping glass staircase leading to my private rooftop terrace. They absorbed the immaculate interior design that radiated immense generational wealth. It was a level of pure luxury that my father Marcus had spent his entire adult life desperately trying to project, but could never actually afford. The stark reality of my success hit them like a physical blow, short-circuiting their deeply ingrained delusions. For a long, heavy moment, the only sound in the penthouse was the soft ambient jazz playing from the hidden speakers. My guests slowly turned in their chairs, watching the bizarre intrusion with cool, detached amusement. Then Helen found her voice. She immediately turned on the waterworks, defaulting to her absolute favorite weapon of maternal manipulation. She threw her hands over her mouth and forced large, dramatic tears to spill down her cheeks. "Maya, my sweet, beautiful girl." Helen sobbed, taking a slow, theatrical step forward. "We were so incredibly worried about you. I have missed my daughter so much. We had absolutely no idea you were living like this. Why did you push your family away when we love you so much?" I did not stand up to greet her. I remained perfectly seated at the head of my dining table, casually crossing my legs and resting my hands on the cool marble surface. I looked at the woman who had locked me out in the freezing snow and called me a worthless embarrassment, and I felt absolutely nothing. My executives watched the performance in silence, expertly reading the room. They knew exactly what kind of toxic predators had just walked through my door. Marcus pushed past his weeping wife, entirely ignoring my prestigious guests. He marched directly into my dining room, bringing the sharp stench of desperation and stale sweat into my pristine sanctuary. He was a man accustomed to giving orders and expecting immediate, terrified compliance. He slammed his heavy hand down on the edge of my dining table, rattling the silver cutlery. He did not bother asking how I was doing. He did not offer a single word of congratulation for my achievements. He simply looked down at me with his trademark authoritarian glare and issued a command. "You are going to transfer $5 million into the Legacy Logistics corporate account by 5 o'clock this afternoon," Marcus demanded, his voice hard and uncompromising. "The bank has frozen our assets, and we have a massive payroll to meet tomorrow morning. Do not sit there looking at me with that smug expression. I am your father. I brought you into this world. I put a roof over your head and food in your mouth. Everything you have is because of the relentless work ethic I instilled in you. You owe me this money, Maya, and you are going to wire it right now." Chloe stood near the edge of the kitchen island, clutching her designer handbag like a defensive shield. She looked physically ill at the sight of my overwhelming success. Her eyes darted from the expensive catered food to the elite, powerful women sitting at my table. Chloe was supposed to be the successful golden sister. She was supposed to be the one living in luxury. Having to stand in my home and witness her proud father desperately demand money from the sister she had always despised was actively destroying her fragile ego. She looked thoroughly disgusted, but her silence proved just how desperate they truly were. They were actively treating my hard-earned wealth as if it was a communal family asset waiting to be claimed. But the absolute pinnacle of delusion belonged entirely to Preston. Despite the indisputable fact that his terrible financial decisions and reckless spending had brought them to my door begging for a bailout, Preston still genuinely believed he was the smartest man in the room. He walked past Marcus and stepped right up to my chair. He looked down at me, smoothing his wrinkled velvet jacket and offering me a pitying, condescending smile. He glanced at the brilliant female executives sitting at my table and visibly dismissed them as if we were just a group of silly girls playing a game of corporate dress-up. "Listen to your father," Maya Preston said, his voice dripping with unimaginable toxic arrogance. $5 million is a very small price to pay to save your family from a minor cash flow issue, but let us be realistic here. Preston gestured around the penthouse with a broad, sweeping motion. You stumbled into some lucky startup money, and it is completely obvious you are in way over your head. People like you do not know how to handle real wealth. You are going to blow it all on expensive apartments and fancy brunches with your little friends. Transfer the funds to save the company today, and then let me manage the rest of your portfolio. I can protect your assets before you ruin yourself. Just hand over the accounts and let the men handle the heavy lifting. Preston continued to lecture me about capital gains and risk management, using basic finance terms he had probably memorized from a podcast that morning. He genuinely thought he was educating a room full of women who collectively managed billions of dollars in global assets. My guests exchanged silent glances of pure astonishment. The top-tier corporate lawyer seated to my right slowly placed her champagne glass down, her eyes fixed on Preston like a scientist observing a fascinatingly stupid insect. I did not interrupt his pathetic speech. I let him dig his grave deeper and deeper, allowing his fragile male ego to completely expose his staggering incompetence. He honestly believed that because I was a woman, and because I was the family scapegoat, my wealth must be a temporary accident that required his immediate superior intervention. He stood in the absolute center of my empire, surrounded by the undeniable proof of my brilliance, and still dared to call me lucky. I sat perfectly still, looking up at the man who had bankrupted my father, offering to manage my fortune. The sheer audacity of his proposal hung in the air, wrapping around the room like a thick, suffocating cloud. Preston stood in the center of my dining room with his chest puffed out, waiting for me to eagerly accept his ridiculous offer. The brilliant women seated around my custom marble table were absolutely silent, watching me to see exactly how I would handle this astonishing display of disrespect. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum or raise my voice the way Helen always did when she desperately wanted to control a room. I simply stood up from my chair, allowing the heavy silence to stretch until it became suffocating. I walked slowly past Preston, completely ignoring his extended hand, and made my way toward the private bar at the far end of the penthouse. The family watched my every move as if I were a predator circling its prey. I reached for a vintage bottle of wine that cost exactly $5,000 a bottle, I kept specifically reserved for celebrating major corporate acquisitions. I picked up a delicate crystal glass and poured the dark red liquid, listening to the soft splashing sound it made in the quiet room. I took my time swirling the wine, taking a slow, deliberate sip, and letting the rich, complex flavors settle. Only then did I turn around to face the four people who had spent my entire life trying to convince me I was nothing. "You want to talk about handling real wealth, Preston?" I asked, my voice perfectly level, carrying clearly across the massive space. "You want to manage my portfolio, while your own company is bleeding to death from the financial wounds you inflicted. But this is not just about your staggering incompetence. This is about a long-standing family tradition of theft." I looked directly at Chloe, watching the color drain from her face. I saw her grip on her designer bag tighten until her knuckles turned white. "Let us take a walk down memory lane," I continued, stepping slowly back toward the center of the room. "Let us go back 10 years to when I was 20 years old, sitting in my cramped bedroom while the rest of you were attending lavish country club galas. I spent 6 grueling months meticulously researching and drafting a comprehensive business plan to modernize the legacy logistics supply chain. It was a brilliant strategy designed to cut overhead costs by 30% and integrate automated tracking systems. I poured my heart and soul into that portfolio, genuinely hoping it would finally earn me a place of respect at my father's table. Chloe took a trembling step back, her eyes darting nervously toward the elevator doors. "But you could not stand the idea of me succeeding Chloe," I said, locking my gaze onto hers. "You snuck into my room while I was working my part-time job and you stole my external hard drive. You took my 6 months of exhausting research, stripped my name off the title page, and presented it to the executive board as your own visionary strategy. You used my late nights and my intelligence to secure your position as vice president of operations." Helen gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if she was deeply offended by the truth, but I immediately turned my cold stare to Marcus. "And you knew," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous chill, "when I came to you crying with the original timestamps and the digital source files proving that Chloe had stolen my work, you did not care at all. You took the evidence and you shredded it right in front of me. You told me to stop being a jealous liar. You told me Chloe was the golden child, the face of the company, and that my role was to stay in the shadows and not embarrass the family name. You covered up her theft because it fit your perfect twisted narrative." I took another slow sip of my wine, tasting the absolute victory in the glass. "You do not see me as a daughter." I stated the words, slicing through the room with surgical precision. "You never have. You see me as a stepping stone. I am just a convenient resource to be used, drained, and discarded whenever it suits your selfish needs. You locked me out in the freezing snow on Christmas Eve because I was an inconvenience to your perfect holiday image. And now you break into my home demanding $5 million of my hard-earned money, as if it is your divine right." Marcus clenched his fists, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Maya, you listen to me right now," he growled, taking a threatening step forward. "I am your father, and I am ordering you to transfer those funds to the corporate account by 5 o'clock. But his authority meant absolutely nothing in my world anymore. I simply raised my left hand and snapped my fingers twice. Instantly, 2 massive, impeccably dressed security guards stepped out from the shadowed hallway leading to my private office. They moved with silent military precision, positioning themselves directly between me and my furious family. They did not need to draw weapons or raise their voices. Their sheer size and intimidating presence were more than enough to make Preston stumble backward in pure terror. "Show these uninvited guests to the service elevator," I instructed my guards, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "They are trespassing." Helen let out a dramatic shriek, clutching Preston's arm as the guards advanced on them, forcing them toward the exit. Chloe was already backing away toward the doors, looking completely humiliated in front of my elite executives who were watching the entire pathetic display with quiet disgust. But Marcus refused to go quietly. He stood his ground for one final desperate moment, his pride wounded beyond repair. He pointed a shaking finger at me, spitting with unhinged rage. "Fine," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of his collapsing empire. "Keep your dirty money, Maya. We do not need you. Tomorrow, I am meeting the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. They are real business people who know how to make a deal. They will save us, and the moment they do, I will personally erase your name from our family tree forever." The heavy brass doors of the elevator slid shut, cutting off the sound of his furious shouting, and leaving my penthouse in total peace once again. I turned back to my guests, offering them a warm, polite smile as I took my seat at the head of the table. They raised their glasses to me in a silent toast of solidarity. Let Marcus believe whatever he needed to believe to get through the night. Tomorrow at noon, he was going to walk into the Obsidian Holdings boardroom and finally realize that the family tree he wanted to erase me from was already chopped down, and I was the one holding the axe. The 2 security guards moved with the synchronized efficiency of highly trained operatives. They did not speak a single word. The guard on the left, an imposing man whose tailored suit barely concealed his sheer muscle mass, clamped a massive hand onto Preston's shoulder. Preston let out a high-pitched yelp of surprise as he was physically spun around. His velvet jacket crumpled under the guard's grip, and his expensive leather loafers scrambled uselessly against the polished marble floor. All of his Ivy League bravado completely evaporated as he was forcefully marched toward the waiting elevator like a misbehaving toddler. Marcus fared no better. The second guard approached him with a cold, blank expression that completely neutralized my father's intimidating corporate glare. Marcus tried to plant his feet, attempting to project the unstoppable authority he wielded at Legacy Logistics. "Take your hands off me," Marcus snarled, attempting to shove the guard away. "I am a chief executive. I will sue you and this entire building for assault." The guard simply shifted his weight, absorbing the blow, as if a fly had landed on his chest. Then, with a swift, practiced motion, the guard locked his arm through my father's, hooking him in an inescapable hold, and began dragging him backward. Marcus stumbled, his face turning an apocalyptic shade of purple, as his absolute lack of power was put on full display in front of my elite guests. Chloe, seeing the physical removal of the two supposed patriarchs, let out a terrified squeak and sprinted toward the open elevator doors, entirely on her own accord, terrified of being touched. But Helen refused to surrender. As the guards maneuvered her husband and son-in-law into the steel cabin, my mother dug her spiked heels desperately into the hand-woven silk rug. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving under her designer pearls. When she realized that tears and fake medical emergencies were completely useless against me, she immediately switched to her final and most deeply ingrained manipulation tactic: religious guilt. Maya Helen cried out, her voice taking on a trembling, theatrical cadence that she usually reserved for Sunday morning church services. "How can you do this to your own flesh and blood? The Lord is watching you right now, Maya. He sees the wickedness in your heart. Honor thy father and thy mother, that your days may be long upon the land. That is the commandment, Maya. It is a sacred law. You are breaking a sacred covenant by turning your back on the people who gave you life. You are hoarding wealth while your own parents suffer. Proverbs clearly states that a greedy man brings trouble to his family. You are bringing ruin upon us all out of spite. God will punish this supreme selfishness." I stood near the edge of my dining table, holding my glass of vintage wine, listening to her weaponized scripture. It was so deeply predictable. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch for a long, terrible moment. My executives watched the exchange with rapt attention, completely fascinated by the sheer audacity of this woman. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly against the marble. "You are quoting scripture to me now, Helen," I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. "That is truly fascinating. You must have missed a few pages in Sunday school while you were busy judging the outfits of the other congregants. Because I distinctly remember a few other commandments. I recall one about thou shalt not steal, yet you stood by and clapped while Chloe stole my intellectual property to secure her corporate title. I also recall something about thou shalt not bear false witness. Yet you have spent the last 5 years telling your entire social circle that I was a disturbed dropout to cover up the fact that you threw me out on the street into the freezing snow." Helen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form a defense, but the righteous indignation was draining from her face. "And let us not forget thou shalt not covet," I continued, taking another step closer. "You do not care about my soul, Helen. You do not care about sacred covenants or honoring family. You care about the fact that your country club membership check is about to bounce. You only ever invoke religion when you need a weapon to extract money or compliance from someone you view as beneath you. You use faith as a crowbar to pry open vaults you have absolutely no right to touch. Do not stand in my home surrounded by the wealth I built with my own hands and dare to preach to me about morality. Your morality has always had a price tag, and right now, that price tag is exactly $5 million. You worship nothing but status, and your God is bankrupt." Helen stared at me, completely stripped of her holy armor. The religious mask shattered, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, aging woman who finally realized her oldest manipulation tactics were entirely dead. The guard gently but firmly placed a hand on the small of her back and guided her backward toward the elevator. She stumbled, her posture collapsing as she joined Marcus Preston and Chloe inside the stainless steel cabin. They looked like a pathetic portrait of a fallen dynasty cramped together in the small space, and entirely devoid of their usual superiority. Marcus stood at the front of the elevator adjusting his ruined suit jacket, his chest heaving with defeated rage. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom, refusing to accept that this was the end of his command. "Fine!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of his collapsing empire. "Keep your dirty money, Maya. We do not need you. Tomorrow I am meeting the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. They are real business people who know how to make a deal. They will save us, and the moment they do, I will personally erase your name from our family tree forever." I stood in the center of my beautiful penthouse, framed by the glittering city skyline behind me. I lifted my crystal glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the $5,000 wine. I lowered the glass and locked eyes with my father, allowing a chilling, perfectly calculated smile to spread across my face. "Make sure you wear your best suit tomorrow, Mr. CEO." I said, my voice soft but slicing through the air like a razor blade. Obsidian hates tardiness. Before Marcus could process the implication of my words, the heavy brass doors of the elevator slid shut, sealing them inside and sending them back down to the reality they had created. The penthouse was completely silent after the elevator doors finally closed, sending my family back down to the streets where they belonged. I spent the next few hours dismissing my guests and ensuring they left with the utmost comfort and assurance that our upcoming acquisitions would proceed without any further interruptions. Once the final executive departed, the heavy quiet of the night settled over my home. I walked slowly to my private office, located at the far end of the penthouse. The room was submerged in darkness, illuminated solely by the cold blue glow of 5 large computer monitors. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out over the sprawling city skyline. Millions of lights flickered in the distance, representing countless lives and businesses, but my focus was entirely on the financial data scrolling across my screens. This was my empire. I had built it from nothing, surviving the crushing weight of my family's constant rejection and sabotage. I watched the numbers rise and fall, feeling a profound sense of detachment from the people who shared my bloodline. The soft chime of my private office door opening broke my concentration. My lead forensic investigator stepped into the room. He was a man who specialized in dismantling corporate fraud and tracking hidden assets across international borders. He moved with a quiet efficiency that I deeply respected. He did not offer a friendly greeting or small talk, because the grim expression on his face made it entirely clear that the situation was far beyond simple corporate mismanagement. He walked directly to my heavy oak desk and placed a thick leather-bound file on the surface. The dull thud of the documents hitting the wood seemed to echo through the silent office. He looked at me with a steady gaze and simply stated that the final forensic audit of Legacy Logistics was complete. He warned me that the reality of my father's company was much worse than our initial projections had indicated. I thanked him and waited for him to quietly exit the room before I approached the desk. I reached for the file, feeling a strange physical weight in my hands as I opened the cover. I expected to see a long history of terrible business decisions and reckless spending caused by Marcus and Preston. I anticipated seeing the predictable results of Chloe pretending to understand logistics while draining the company accounts for her personal luxury lifestyle. But as my eyes scanned the first few pages of the executive summary, my blood ran completely cold. The financial ruin of Legacy Logistics was not merely the result of incompetence. It was a massive, carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise. I turned the pages, slowly absorbing the staggering magnitude of their deception. Marcus had not just made bad investments. He had been systematically embezzling funds from his own employees' pension accounts for the past 7 years. There were dozens of shell companies created under fake names, designed specifically to launder money stolen from federal transportation grants. I traced the paper trail of wire fraud, moving millions of dollars into offshore accounts hidden in tax havens. The most horrifying part was seeing Chloe and Preston's signatures authorizing fraudulent invoices and falsified tax returns. They had willfully submitted fabricated financial statements to their investors and the government to secure loans they knew they could never repay. My father, the man who had stood in my home just hours ago demanding $5 million while preaching about his relentless work ethic, was nothing more than a common thief. He was operating a desperate Ponzi scheme that was mere days away from total collapse. If the federal authorities saw even a fraction of this audit, Marcus, Chloe, and Preston would face decades in federal prison. They were not just facing bankruptcy, they were facing absolute total ruin. I sat down in my leather chair, letting the chilling reality wash over me. For years, I had internalized their insults and their abuse. I had believed their narrative that I was the flawed, broken child who could never measure up to their pristine legacy. Yet here in black and white was the indisputable proof that their entire lives were built on a foundation of lies, theft, and breathtaking arrogance. They had looked down on me while standing on a rotting floor, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to fall through. The $5 million they demanded would not have saved them. It would have only implicated me in their massive criminal conspiracy. They were entirely willing to drag me down into a federal indictment just to buy themselves a few more weeks of luxury. A deep, icy calm settled over my mind. All the lingering threads of daughterly guilt or familial obligation dissolved completely, leaving behind nothing but pure, sharp clarity. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the legal foreclosure documents my attorneys had prepared the previous week. I had already purchased the primary debt of Legacy Logistics, making me their largest and most aggressive creditor. I picked up my favorite gold pen and signed my name on the final line, authorizing the immediate seizure of all their corporate assets. I carefully gathered the foreclosure authorization and the devastating forensic audit containing the irrefutable evidence of their federal crimes. I slipped every single page into a sleek blood-red folder. The color seemed perfectly fitting for the occasion. Tomorrow morning, Marcus believed he was going to walk into the Obsidian Holdings boardroom to charm his way into a massive corporate bailout. He genuinely thought he could erase my name from the family tree once he secured his rescue funds. He had absolutely no idea that Obsidian Holdings was entirely owned and controlled by my private equity firm. I spent the next hour reviewing every single detail of the trap I had set. I memorized the fraudulent account numbers, the dates of the illegal transfers, and the exact amounts they had stolen from the pension funds of loyal employees who had worked for Legacy Logistics for decades. Marcus had betrayed the very people who built his company, while Chloe used that stolen money to buy designer clothes and finance her fake perfect life. Preston had used his position to facilitate the transfer of dirty money, acting as the arrogant architect of their mutual destruction. I picked up my phone and sent a brief secure message to my legal team and the private security contractors I had hired for the next day. I instructed them to be ready at the Obsidian Holdings headquarters by 11 in the morning. I wanted every possible exit secured. I wanted the corporate boardroom locked down the moment they stepped inside. There would be no escape route for them this time. Helen would likely try to charm the receptionist, Marcus would attempt to command the room, and Preston would inevitably try to talk his way out of the corner. But none of their usual tactics would work against cold, hard, unchangeable facts. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of peace. For the first time in my 30 years on this earth, I was no longer the victim of their narrative. I was the author of their conclusion. I looked at the blood-red folder one last time before turning off the monitors. The glow of the city outside was the only light left in the room. They wanted a corporate meeting, I whispered to the empty, silent penthouse. Let us give them an execution. Marcus had worn his most expensive charcoal suit, but it looked instantly dated and slightly wrinkled against the flawless, sleek aesthetics of the boardroom. He kept checking his heavy gold watch, his foot tapping a frantic, erratic rhythm against the polished concrete floor. Beside him, Helen was clutching her designer handbag tightly to her chest, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that did nothing to stop her visible shivering. Chloe sat completely rigid, staring at her own reflection in the dark, polished surface of the table, clearly intimidated by the sheer generational wealth radiating from every single corner of the room. And then there was Preston. He was sweating profusely. A fine layer of nervous moisture glistened on his forehead, but he was desperately trying to project the alpha male corporate dominance he genuinely believed he possessed. He paced back and forth behind Marcus, continuously adjusting his silk tie and delivering a constant stream of unsolicited business strategy. "Listen to me, Marcus," Preston said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast empty space. "You need to take absolute control of the narrative the exact second this faceless chief executive walks through those doors. Do not let this fancy building intimidate you for a single minute. We are bringing them a legacy brand. We hold all the valuable cards here." Preston leaned over the table, placing his hands flat on the freezing cold stone to emphasize his point. "We demand a 30% capital injection immediately to cover the frozen assets, and we absolutely do not surrender more than 10% equity. I have dealt with these venture capital sharks a million times before. They smell blood in the water, so you have to show them your teeth right from the start. I will take the lead on the financial restructuring terms. I know exactly how to back these corporate types into a corner and force them to bend entirely to our will." He wiped his forehead with a linen handkerchief and offered a smug, condescending laugh that masked his deep internal panic. "It is just a basic negotiation," he bragged, waving his hand dismissively. "It requires actual strategy and real financial leverage, not like that silly little stunt Maya pulled last night. Sitting in her borrowed apartment playing dress-up with her little friends and her hired security guards. She thinks she understands the business world because she had one lucky break with a startup. But this right here is where the real power sits. This is the big leagues. We will get our funding today, secure the company payroll, and then we can finally cut that ungrateful, disrespectful girl out of our lives for good." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing Preston's toxic and completely delusional bravado. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon the commanding authoritarian presence he had used to terrorize his warehouse employees for decades. "You are absolutely right, Preston," Marcus agreed, his voice gaining a fraction of its usual volume. "We do not need her dirty money. We never did. Legacy Logistics is a titan in this industry. Whoever is running Obsidian Holdings will be honored to partner with us. I will make it perfectly clear that we dictate the terms of our own survival." Helen nodded in fervent agreement, gently patting Marcus on the shoulder. "Exactly, darling," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "God always rewards the righteous. We have always maintained our dignity and our class no matter what happens. This building is where we belong, among the elite." They waited. The minutes stretched on endlessly. The psychological warfare of the highest corporate level was something they were completely unprepared to handle. No one came in to offer them coffee. No executive assistant knocked on the door to offer them bottled water or politely apologize for the delay. There was only the freezing air, the rhythmic ticking of the digital clock on the wall, and the heavy, oppressive silence of the glass cage they were trapped inside. Preston's confident pacing gradually slowed down until he finally collapsed heavily into a chair, nervously loosening his collar as the temperature seemed to drop even further. Marcus checked his watch for the 20th time, his face growing red with a mixture of insulted pride and mounting panic. They had been sitting in the freezing boardroom for exactly 45 minutes when the sound of the heavy oak double doors unlatching echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. The family instantly froze. They all held their breath, sitting up perfectly straight, pulling their shoulders back to face their corporate savior. The heavy doors swung open slowly, but it was not a faceless chief executive who entered first. It was two massive, impeccably dressed security guards. They stepped into the room with silent, terrifying military precision. They moved fluidly, securing the perimeter, and standing at absolute attention on either side of the entrance, blocking any possible exit. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but the confident words died instantly in his dry throat. He recognized those exact guards from the night before. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Marcus frowned deeply, his eyes darting between the two imposing men, a look of profound confusion crossing his aging features. Then the sharp, authoritative click of designer heels echoed from the marble hallway outside. I walked through the heavy oak doors wearing a flawlessly tailored dark power suit that radiated absolute authority and total control. I did not rush my steps. I did not smile or offer a polite greeting. I moved with the slow, deliberate, and terrifying grace of an executioner walking confidently to the block. The silence in the boardroom was absolute and deafening. Helen let out a tiny, choked gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Chloe's eyes widened so far they looked like they might shatter from the pressure. Marcus sat completely paralyzed, his jaw hanging slack as his brain aggressively rejected the reality unfolding right in front of him. I walked the entire length of the obsidian stone table, my gaze fixed squarely forward. I reached the head of the table, the singular large tufted leather chair reserved exclusively for the chairman of the board. I pulled it out smoothly and sat down directly across from my father. I crossed my legs, folded my hands perfectly on the cold stone table, and let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds while they suffocated in their own shock. The air inside the boardroom grew incredibly thin. The heavy oak doors had clicked shut behind my security team, sealing the 4 of them inside this perfectly chilled glass vault. No one blinked. No one dared to breathe. The sheer cognitive dissonance of seeing the daughter they had discarded sitting at the absolute pinnacle of corporate power was short-circuiting their brains. They stared at me sitting comfortably in the plush leather chairman's seat at the head of the massive obsidian stone table. I rested my hands on the cool, dark surface, projecting nothing but absolute stillness. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the faint hum of the climate control system, keeping the room at a deliberately uncomfortable temperature. Then Preston broke the silence. He let out a sudden hollow chuckle that echoed awkwardly off the glass walls. He shook his head, running a damp hand over his sweating forehead, forcefully pushing his deeply ingrained arrogance back to the surface. He simply could not compute the reality standing right in front of him. In his narrow patriarchal worldview, there was absolutely no way a woman, especially the family scapegoat, could be the apex predator in this room. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to look relaxed, and offered me a deeply condescending smirk. "You almost had us, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with patronizing amusement. "I have to admit this is a very elaborate prank. Did you pay off the guards downstairs to let you sneak in here and pretend you are a big shot before the real executives arrive? It is cute, but we have actual serious business to conduct today. Go fetch us some coffee, Maya. We are waiting for your boss." Chloe let out a breath she had been holding, a nervous giggle escaping her lips as she eagerly clung to Preston's ridiculous logic. Of course, that had to be the explanation. To Chloe, I was just an assistant playing dress-up, a minor annoyance interfering with their crucial day. Helen visibly relaxed, unwrapping her arms from her chest and adjusting her pearl necklace. She looked at me with deep annoyance, as if I had merely interrupted a pleasant afternoon tea party. Marcus, however, remained entirely silent. His eyes were narrowed, studying my flawlessly tailored power suit, the perfectly positioned security guards at the door, and the absolute lack of fear in my posture. Somewhere deep in his calculating mind, a tiny seed of pure terror was beginning to take root. I did not smile. I did not flinch. I did not waste my breath correcting the pathetic man sitting across from me. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick, blood-red folder I had prepared the night before. The vivid color was a violent contrast against the dark, sleek surface of the table. I placed my hand flat on top of it, feeling the profound weight of their entire corrupted history beneath my palm. The room grew deathly quiet again, as I slowly, deliberately slid the heavy folder down the length of the long mahogany table. The smooth friction of the material against the polished wood was the only sound in the freezing room. It traveled with perfect precision, stopping exactly 1 inch from Marcus and his tightly folded hands. "Open it," I commanded. My voice was low, but it carried the undeniable weight of absolute authority. Marcus stared at the red folder, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Slowly, his trembling fingers reached out and flipped the cover open. His eyes darted across the top page, and the color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. It was the complete consolidated portfolio of legacy logistics corporate debt. $15 million in leveraged liabilities, defaulted loans, aggressively acquired mortgages, and unpaid vendor invoices. He saw the official transfer signatures proving that one single entity now owned every single fraction of his failing empire. "Welcome to Obsidian Holdings," I said, my voice echoing softly against the cold glass walls. "I want to be perfectly clear about who you are dealing with today. There is no hidden board of directors. There is no senior partner waiting in the wings. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of this firm, and today I am your executioner." Helen gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth as the crushing reality finally crashed down upon her. She looked frantically around the room, searching for a manager or an authority figure to appeal to, but found only my cold, unyielding stare. Chloe physically recoiled, sinking deep into her chair, as if trying to merge with the upholstery, her face completely devoid of its usual arrogant sneer. Preston lost his smirk instantly. His jaw dropped, and he stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing that his aggressive negotiation tactics were entirely useless against the person who literally owned the building they were sitting in. He was a small, pathetic man who had just brought a butter knife to a nuclear war. But Marcus could not accept defeat. His massive, fragile ego simply would not allow him to surrender to the daughter he had spent 30 years tearing down. He suddenly slammed his fist onto the table with explosive force, shaking the thick glass of water sitting near his elbow. "This is impossible!" he roared, his voice echoing violently in the pristine room. "This is a massive fraud. You are nothing but a discarded failure. You do not have the capital to acquire this level of corporate debt. I demand to speak to the real owner of this firm right now. Bring me the men in charge of this acquisition immediately. I will not sit here and be humiliated by an ungrateful child playing corporate raider." He was panting heavily, a thick vein throbbing visibly in his neck. He pointed a shaking finger at me, desperately clinging to the crumbling illusion of his own supremacy. He expected me to argue. He expected me to defend my position or raise my voice to match his frantic, furious energy. I did absolutely none of those things. I simply picked up a sleek silver remote resting beside my hand and pressed a single button. Instantly, the lights in the boardroom dimmed, and the entire 30-foot glass wall behind me transformed into a massive, high-definition digital screen. The brilliant display illuminated their terrified faces in a cold, harsh light, projecting the catastrophic, irrefutable forensic evidence of legacy logistics' financial ruin directly into the room. The massive digital wall glowed with terrifying clarity, illuminating the pale and horrified faces of my family. Marcus was still standing, his chest heaving with misplaced righteous anger, but the numbers projected behind me were absolute and entirely undeniable. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic yelling. Instead, I calmly stood up from the plush chairman's seat and picked up a sleek silver laser pointer from the table. I pressed the button, sending a sharp green dot directly onto the center of the colossal screen. The first slide of the presentation was simple. It displayed a massive downward trending graph colored in a bruised purple, tracking the brutal 5-year decline of legacy logistics. "Sit down, Marcus," I commanded, my voice slicing through his hysterical blustering with icy precision. "This is a boardroom, not your living room, and you are going to listen to exactly why your empire is currently burning to the ground." He opened his mouth to shout another defensive insult, but the sheer weight of my authority forced him back into his chair. He collapsed like a deflated balloon, his eyes darting frantically across the screen. I directed the green laser to the highest peak of the graph, representing the year I had initially left the company. "You have spent the last half-decade telling your country club friends and your terrified shareholders that the global economy was to blame for your shrinking margins." I began pacing slowly across the front of the room. "You blamed inflation, you blamed fuel costs, and you blamed supply chain disruptions. But the data tells a completely different story." I clicked the remote, and the screen shifted to a detailed comparative analysis. I showed them the profit margins of their top 3 competitors during that exact same 5-year period. Every single one of them had grown by at least 20%, despite the very same economic conditions. Your competitors adapted, Marcus. They invested in automated tracking software and modern warehousing solutions, while you stubbornly insisted that your outdated paper-based system was superior. You bled millions of dollars in operational inefficiencies simply because your massive ego could not handle learning a new software program. But the technological failure was only the beginning. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed a staggering list of employee turnover rates. I focused the laser pointer on the executive retention statistics. You did not just lose money, Marcus. You actively drove away the absolute best minds in your company. You refused to promote anyone who did not look and think exactly like you. I pointed to a specific dataset showing the departure of several top-tier female logistics directors and diverse middle management staff. You created a toxic, archaic culture where brilliant modern minds were suffocated by your outdated, patriarchal demands. You dismissed their innovative proposals as liberal nonsense, and you replaced them with spineless yes-men like Preston, who knew absolutely nothing about global shipping, but knew exactly how to massage your fragile ego. Preston swallowed hard, pulling at his collar, as the spotlight of my presentation shifted directly onto his abysmal performance metrics. His department alone had lost 3 major federal contracts in a single quarter due to gross negligence and complete lack of oversight. Helen tried to interrupt, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and indignation. "Maya, this is your father you are talking to?" she pleaded, gripping her pearl necklace. "You cannot speak to him this way after everything he built for our family." I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes entirely focused on the screen. "He did not build anything for this family, Helen," I stated coldly. "He inherited a functional company, and he slowly strangled it to death." And Chloe did not help. I shifted the slide to show the marketing and public relations budget, which Chloe had completely commandeered. The numbers revealed millions spent on lavish corporate retreats, luxury leased vehicles, and phantom consulting fees that produced absolutely zero return on investment. You drained the operating budget to fund a lifestyle you did not earn, Chloe. You played at being an executive while the actual workers in the warehouses were being denied their annual bonuses and basic safety upgrades. Chloe shrank down in her seat, her face burning bright red as her absolute uselessness was broadcast in high definition. Marcus could not take it anymore. The systematic public dismantling of his entire identity was pushing him over the edge of sanity. He slammed both hands onto the table and pushed himself to his feet, his face contorted with pure, desperate rage. "You ungrateful little wretch!" he screamed, his voice booming through the integrated microphones built into the conference table. "I am the patriarch of this family. I am the creator of this legacy, and I will not be lectured by a dropout who got lucky. I know what you are trying to do. You are trying to manipulate the numbers to make yourself look like a genius, but I am not going to let you steal my company. I will sue you for everything you have." He continued to yell, his words dissolving into a frantic string of threats and insults. I simply looked down at the control panel embedded in the table in front of me. I pressed a single red button, cutting off the power to the table microphones. His booming voice was instantly muffled, swallowed by the vast acoustic dampening of the massive boardroom. He stood there shouting in total silence, looking like a madman screaming into a void. I waited for him to run out of breath. When his chest was heaving and he finally realized no one could hear his pathetic tantrums, I turned my attention back to the massive display behind me. I pressed the power button on the remote, and the entire glass wall instantly went black, plunging the room back into a heavy, oppressive silence. The sudden darkness was startling, leaving them with nowhere to look but directly at me. I walked slowly back to the chairman's seat and leaned forward, resting my arms on the cool obsidian stone. I looked directly into my father's terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Your outdated leadership and your massive ego destroyed the corporate culture," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "Your refusal to adapt cost you your competitive advantage. But the real reason you are bankrupt is not just incompetence, Dad. The real reason your empire is completely dead is theft. The word theft hung in the freezing air of the boardroom like a physical weight. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. His brain was completely paralyzed by the sheer blunt force of the accusation. But I was no longer looking at my father. I turned my attention away from the man who had despised me and focused entirely on the man who had actively engineered his ruin. I looked directly at Preston. The arrogant alpha male posture he had carried into the room had completely evaporated. He was practically vibrating with terror. The fine layer of sweat on his forehead had turned into thick, heavy drops, rolling down his pale face and soaking into the collar of his expensive custom-tailored shirt. He knew exactly what was coming. He shifted in his heavy leather chair, glancing frantically at the security guards blocking the doors, realizing there was absolutely no escape from the reckoning he had brought upon himself. I reached out and picked up the thick blood-red folder that contained the forensic audit. I did not pass it to Marcus. Instead, I placed it flat on the flawless mahogany surface and pushed it smoothly down the length of the table. The heavy folder glided with a soft, terrifying hiss across the polished wood. Everyone watched it move as if it were a loaded weapon. It slowed down and came to a perfect, precise stop directly in front of my sister Chloe. Chloe stared at the red leather cover. She did not touch it. Her perfect posture had collapsed, and her eyes darted nervously between the folder and my face. "What is this, Maya?" she asked, her voice reduced to a fragile, trembling whisper. Preston immediately lunged forward, reaching his hand out to grab the folder away from his wife. "Do not look at that, Chloe," he stammered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of his mounting panic. "She is making things up. She fabricated all of this out of pure jealousy because she hates our family. She is just trying to tear our marriage apart to distract your father from her illegal corporate takeover. Do not let her manipulate you." I did not even raise my voice. I simply locked eyes with Preston and delivered the facts with the surgical precision of a lethal strike. "Leave the folder exactly where it is, Preston," I commanded softly. The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "You are entirely correct about one thing. Legacy Logistics did not lose $15 million strictly through bad investments and terrible management. That kind of catastrophic loss requires dedicated effort. It requires active, relentless theft." I turned my gaze back to my sister, who was now breathing in short, shallow gasps. "You see, Chloe, your husband did not just make poor business decisions. Over the past 36 months, Preston has systematically embezzled exactly $8 million from your father's company." Helen let out a sharp, horrified gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. Marcus stared at Preston, his face twisting into a mask of absolute disbelief and rising fury. Preston shrank back into his chair, shaking his head violently, denying everything without forming a single coherent word. "He created 14 different shell companies operating under the guise of independent logistics contractors." I continued, my voice steady and completely relentless. "He generated hundreds of fake invoices for phantom shipments and ghost vendors. And because you blindly trusted your brilliant husband, Chloe, you personally signed the payment authorizations. You authorized the transfer of millions of dollars of corporate funds right into his offshore accounts. You legally tied yourself to his massive federal fraud." Chloe shook her head, tears finally brimming in her wide, terrified eyes. "No," she whispered. "No, Preston would never do that. He was investing the money to secure our future. He told me he was building our portfolio." "He was building a portfolio," I agreed, "but it certainly was not yours." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "Those offshore accounts were not investments, Chloe. They were funneled directly into high-stakes, illegal gambling syndicates based in the Cayman Islands. Your husband has a massive, devastating gambling addiction. He lost nearly $4 million of your father's money playing online baccarat and backing unregulated sports bets." Preston buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic whimpering sound that echoed miserably in the silent glass room. "But the gambling, was not the most expensive part of his betrayal, I said, letting my words sink deep into my sister's fragile reality. He also needed to launder a significant portion of that stolen cash to hide it from the federal auditors. So he made a major real estate purchase. He bought a luxury penthouse condominium in downtown Miami entirely in cash. Chloe's expression shifted from terror to a desperate flickering hope. A condo? She asked, her voice trembling. He bought us a vacation home. Why would he hide that from me? I looked at her, feeling absolutely no pity for the golden child who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself. He did not buy it for you, Chloe. He bought it for his 22-year-old mistress. Her name is Isabella. She is an aspiring fitness model who currently resides in that $3 million penthouse, completely rent-free while driving a customized sports car paid for entirely by legacy logistics pension funds. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a perfect illusion shattering into a million jagged, irreparable pieces. Chloe stared at me, her carefully contoured face completely frozen in shock. Look inside the folder, Chloe, I instructed, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. Preston grabbed his wife's arm, his fingers digging into her expensive silk sleeve. Chloe, please do not, he begged, tears streaming down his flushed, sweaty face. It meant nothing. I love you. It was just a stupid mistake. She set me up. Please, baby, you have to believe me. Chloe slowly turned her head to look at her husband. The sheer pathetic desperation in his eyes confirmed every single word I had just spoken. She ripped her arm away from his grasp with a sudden violent jerk. Her manicured hands were shaking violently as she reached out and grabbed the edge of the blood-red cover. She flipped the folder open. A cascade of high-definition photographs and heavily highlighted financial documents immediately spilled out across the dark stone table. There were crystal-clear surveillance photos of Preston walking hand in hand with a stunning young blonde woman along the beaches of Miami. There were pictures of them kissing on the balcony of the luxury penthouse. There was a copy of the property deed with Preston's signature clearly listed alongside hers. Underneath the photographs were dozens of offshore bank statements with thick yellow highlighting showing the exact transfer dates aligning perfectly with the fraudulent invoices Chloe had signed. Chloe picked up a photograph of her husband wrapping his arms around a girl who was 10 years younger than her. Her hands trembled so violently, the glossy paper rattled against the stone table. The pristine, flawless life she had built, the superiority she had always wielded over me, the perfect marriage she had endlessly bragged about to her country club friends, it was all completely fake. She was not a brilliant executive or a beloved wife. She was a naive, manipulated fool who had been used to bankrupt her own family to fund her husband's secret life. A guttural, agonizing sob tore through Chloe's throat as the ultimate golden child finally broke. The agonizing sob that tore from Chloe's throat was the exact sound of a perfect, fragile illusion violently shattering into a million irreparable pieces. For a fraction of a second, the enormous glass boardroom hung in a state of suspended animation. No one moved and no one breathed. The sheer magnitude of Preston's betrayal hung in the freezing air, heavy and suffocating. Then the invisible dam broke, and total, absolute chaos erupted exactly as I had meticulously calculated it would. The dominoes I had spent months carefully lining up in the shadows were finally falling, and they were taking the entire family down with them. Chloe did not just cry. Her initial shock morphed instantly into a primal, unhinged fury that warped her perfectly contoured face into a mask of pure hatred. She looked at her husband, the man who had bought a luxury penthouse for a 22-year-old fitness model using her family money, and let out a shriek that rattled the thick glass walls. Without a single second of hesitation, she grabbed her half-full ceramic mug of scalding hot coffee and hurled it directly at Preston's chest. The dark liquid exploded against his expensive custom-tailored shirt, staining the crisp white fabric with an ugly spreading brown patch. The heavy ceramic mug bounced off his collarbone with a loud, sickening thud and crashed onto the floor, shattering into jagged pieces. Preston let out a pathetic yelp of pain, stumbling backward and tripping over the legs of his own chair. But Chloe was not finished. She launched herself across the space between them, her manicured hands curled into claws, screaming hysterically about the mistress, the penthouse, and the sheer humiliation of being played for an absolute fool. She slapped at his arms, his shoulders, his chest, entirely losing her mind as she demanded to know how he could do this to her, to their marriage, to their so-called perfect life. Preston could only cower, raising his arms in a desperate, futile attempt to shield his face from his wife's violent barrage. He kept stammering pathetic apologies, begging her to calm down, pleading with her to listen to reason, but his words were completely drowned out by her relentless shrieking. The revelation of the embezzlement had a profoundly different effect on Marcus. For my father, this was not about a broken marriage or a shattered romance. This was about his legacy, his empire, and his massive, fragile ego. He had spent years championing Preston as the brilliant business mind of the family. He had elevated this parasitic son-in-law over his own flesh and blood, granting him unprecedented access to the company accounts simply because Preston knew how to flatter him. And now Marcus realized that the man he had trusted completely was the exact reason he was currently standing in a boardroom facing absolute financial ruin. A sound that was half roar and half animalistic growl erupted from deep inside Marcus. He shoved his heavy leather chair backward with such explosive force that it toppled over, crashing onto the polished floor. He ignored the pain in his aging joints and lunged across the wide mahogany table. He completely disregarded all sense of corporate decorum and all his carefully crafted aristocratic dignity. He grabbed Preston by the collar of his ruined coffee-stained shirt and hauled the younger man upward, nearly lifting him off his feet. "You stole from me!" Marcus bellowed, his face turning an alarming shade of purple as the veins in his neck bulged dangerously. "You ruined my company. You destroyed my family legacy, you miserable, pathetic thief. I trusted you, and you gutted my empire to play high-stakes games and buy apartments for cheap models." Preston choked, gasping for air, as Marcus twisted the collar tighter, shaking him violently like a rag doll. Marcus was screaming obscenities, spit flying from his lips, entirely consumed by a rage so profound it bordered on complete madness. The two men struggled against the edge of the table, knocking over water glasses and sending expensive leather portfolios crashing to the ground in a messy, undignified brawl. While her husband and her favored son-in-law were engaged in a physical fight, and her golden child was having a complete nervous breakdown, Helen reacted exactly the way I knew she would. For my mother, the only thing worse than bankruptcy was public scandal. The thought of their country club friends finding out about the offshore gambling syndicates and the young mistress terrified her far more than the actual loss of millions of dollars. She dropped to her knees, scrambling across the polished floor in her designer dress, desperately clawing at the scattered high-definition photographs and highlighted bank statements. She was frantically gathering the evidence, pulling the glossy pictures of Preston and his young girlfriend against her chest, trying to hide them, trying to somehow unsee the devastating truth. She began tearing at the heavy financial documents, ripping the thick paper with her trembling hands, crying quietly as she desperately tried to shred the undeniable proof of their catastrophic failure. She believed that if she could just destroy the papers, she could somehow make the ugly scandal disappear. I remained entirely still, sitting comfortably in the plush leather chairman's seat at the head of the long table. I watched the violent, spectacular carnage unfold with a sense of cold, absolute detachment. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for any of them. I did not feel the urge to intervene or stop the fighting. I simply watched them tear each other apart, recognizing that this was the exact consequence of their own greed, arrogance, and lifelong cruelty. They had spent 3 decades treating me like an outcast, like a convenient scapegoat for all their flaws, and now they were finally eating each other alive. I let the chaos reign for exactly 60 seconds, allowing the reality of their total destruction to fully settle into their bones. Then I decided the performance had gone on long enough. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sharp, crisp sound cut through the hysterical screaming and the violent struggling. Immediately, the four massive security guards who had been standing silently by the heavy oak doors moved into action with swift, brutal efficiency. They crossed the room in long, rapid strides. Two of them grabbed Marcus by his shoulders, forcibly prying his hands away from Preston's collar and slamming him back down against the surface of the mahogany table, pinning his arms securely behind his back. The other two guards grabbed Preston, hauling him upright and shoving him face down against the cold, polished stone, pressing their heavy hands into his shoulders so he could not move a single inch. Chloe froze mid-scream, taking a terrified step backward as the guards took absolute control of the room. Helen remained on the floor, clutching a fistful of torn bank statements, looking up at me with wide, panicked eyes. The violent struggling stopped, replaced entirely by the sound of Marcus and Preston's heavy, ragged breathing as they lay pinned helplessly against the table. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored power suit. I walked around the edge of the table, my heels clicking softly against the floor, until I was standing directly over my father and his pathetic son-in-law. I leaned in close, resting my hands on the table and looking down at their defeated faces. "Stop acting like animals," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying whisper that echoed in the sudden heavy silence of the room. "You need to pull yourselves together and pay very close attention, because I have not even gotten to the best part." The heavy breathing of the two men pinned against the polished mahogany table was the only sound left in the massive glass room. I did not smile and I did not flinch. I slowly turned my back on their pathetic struggling and walked at a measured, deliberate pace around the edge of the table. The soft, rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of their freedom. I reached the plush leather chairman's seat at the head of the boardroom and sat down. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored suit and folded my hands perfectly together, resting them on the cool, dark stone surface. I projected nothing but absolute, unwavering stillness. I looked at the broken people scattered around the room. Helen was still frozen on her knees, clutching shredded papers to her chest. Chloe was staring blankly at the wall, completely catatonic from the shock of her shattered reality. And the two men who had spent their entire lives treating me like a worthless outcast were now completely at my mercy. I let the heavy, oppressive silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment before I finally spoke. My voice was calm and smooth, carrying the conversational tone of someone discussing the weather rather than delivering a life sentence. "You see, Preston?" I began, my eyes locking onto his terrified, sweating face, pressed against the table. "Discovering your little offshore gambling operation and your luxury love nest was incredibly simple. The forensic accountants I hired traced your clumsy shell companies in less than 48 hours. You were arrogant and you were sloppy, but uncovering the theft was merely the first step of my acquisition strategy. As the new primary debt holder and the sole owner of Legacy Logistics financial liabilities, I had a very strict fiduciary duty to report any and all financial irregularities." Preston stopped thrashing under the heavy hands of the security guards. His eyes widened to an impossible size as the true gravity of my words began to penetrate his thick skull. I did not keep this blood-red folder a secret. I continued, my voice slicing through his rising panic. "Yesterday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I officially filed a suspicious activity report regarding the missing $8 million. I submitted the full unredacted forensic audit, along with all the high-definition photographs and offshore bank statements, directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And because your little embezzlement scheme involved wiring millions of dollars across international borders, I also forwarded the entire dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The transformation in Preston was immediate and absolute. The invisible shield of his wealthy upbringing, his expensive education, and his deeply ingrained white privilege evaporated into thin air. He had spent his entire life believing that his charm, his connections, and his family name made him completely untouchable. He believed that white-collar crimes were just accounting errors that could be swept under the rug with a hefty fine and a polite apology. But the letter's FBI stripped all of that away, leaving nothing but a small, terrified boy facing the very real prospect of a concrete cell. He began to shake violently, his entire body trembling against the mahogany wood. Federal agents were not going to be charmed by his custom-tailored suits or his country club membership. They were going to seize his assets, freeze his accounts, and lock him away for wire fraud, embezzlement, and international money laundering. Marcus, tell them, he shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine. He twisted his neck, trying to look at his father-in-law, who was pinned just a few feet away. Marcus, you have to protect me. You know the governor. You know the state senators. Tell them it was a corporate loan. Tell them it was an internal accounting mistake and we are paying it back. You have to fix this. Please, Marcus, do not let them take me away. But Marcus did not even look at him. My father was not listening to Preston's pathetic begging because my father's calculating mind was currently short-circuiting with his own sheer terror. As the chief executive officer of Legacy Logistics, Marcus was the one who had signed the quarterly financial disclosures. He was the one who had legally certified that the company accounts were accurate while $8 million was being siphoned out the back door. The federal agents would not just stop at Preston. They would tear the entire corporate structure apart. They would seize my father's assets, audit his personal bank accounts, and hold him directly liable for criminal negligence and corporate fraud. Marcus was looking at the exact same federal prison sentence as his idiot son-in-law. I watched my father's face drain of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. The righteous anger and the booming patriarchal authority that had defined his entire existence completely vanished. He looked at me, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate panic. He gave a weak, pathetic nod, signaling his absolute surrender. I raised a single finger, and the security guards immediately stepped back, releasing their heavy grip on the two men. Preston stayed slumped against the table, sobbing uncontrollably into the polished wood. But Marcus slowly slid off the edge of the table. I expected him to stand up. I expected him to try and salvage one final shred of his ruined dignity. He did absolutely no such thing. His legs buckled beneath him, and the great untouchable patriarch of the family collapsed directly onto the cold boardroom floor. He crawled forward a few inches, his expensive suit wrinkling against the carpet. He looked up at me from his knees, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face, his lower lip trembling as he wept openly in front of his wife, his daughters, and my security team. He clasped his shaking hands together in a desperate posture of prayer. "Blood is thicker than water, Maya," he sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, ragged plea. "You cannot do this to us. We are your family. You cannot send your own father and your brother-in-law to federal prison." I looked down at the man who had spent 30 years making sure I knew I was entirely worthless. Marcus was literally on his knees, his expensive tailored suit soaking up the spilled coffee from the polished floor, his face red and slick with tears. He invoked the concept of family blood, as if those words suddenly held some magical protective power. As if the DNA we shared was a shield he could hide behind after spending decades treating me like an unwanted infection. I watched his chest heave with panicked sobs, but I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no triumph, no lingering daughterly affection. The well of my empathy had dried up a very long time ago, starved by his constant neglect and emotional abuse. "Get off the floor, Marcus," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are wasting my very valuable time." I did not wait for him to comply. I turned back to my leather briefcase and retrieved the final item I had prepared for this meeting. It was not a thick folder or another dramatic presentation. It was just a single crisp sheet of heavy stock legal paper and a sleek black Mont Blanc pen. I placed the paper flat on the glass table and set the heavy pen exactly in the center of it. With one smooth, calculated push, I sent them sliding across the polished surface. They stopped perfectly at the edge, right where Marcus was gripping the table, trying to pull his shaking body upward. "Read it," I commanded. My father reached out with trembling fingers, pulling the document closer to his face. His eyes darted over the legal text, his lips moving silently as he tried to process the heavy legal jargon through his blinding panic. "It is a standard absolute transfer of ownership agreement." I explained, my words echoing clearly in the silent freezing room. "You are going to sign over 100% of Legacy Logistics to me right now. You will transfer every single voting share, every physical asset, every warehouse, and every remaining cent of corporate capital directly into Obsidian Holdings. You are going to sell me your entire life's work, your precious family legacy, for exactly $1. In exchange, I will instruct my attorneys to permanently withhold the unredacted ledgers from the federal investigators. I will give them the sanitized version, protecting your personal liberty, while I take total and permanent control of the company." Helen let out a sharp, horrified gasp, stumbling forward and clutching the edge of the table. "Maya, you cannot do this!" she cried, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "That is robbery. You are stealing our entire livelihood. You are leaving us with absolutely nothing. How are we supposed to survive?" I ignored my mother entirely, keeping my eyes locked on the men at the table. Preston, who was still pinned against the mahogany by my security guards, suddenly began to thrash violently. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice shrill and dripping with desperate sweat. "Wait, Maya, let us negotiate. You cannot just take everything. If you send those unredacted files to the FBI, I am not going down alone." He twisted his head to look directly at me, his face contorted with a vicious rat-like desperation. Chloe signed those authorization forms. He spat his true colors finally on full display for everyone in the room to see. My wife signed every single fraudulent transfer. She was the executive sponsor of the shell accounts. If the feds come for me, I swear to heaven I will take her down with me. I will tell them she was the mastermind. She will go to federal prison right alongside me. You will be sending your own sister to jail, Maya. Chloe let out a choked, agonizing wail, stumbling backward until her back hit the thick glass wall of the boardroom. She stared at the man she had married, the man she had constantly flaunted in my face as the ultimate prize. In his moment of pure, unadulterated desperation, Preston was eagerly offering her up as a human shield just to save his own miserable skin. The golden child's perfect husband was willing to trade her freedom for a reduced sentence without a single second of hesitation. I looked at Preston and let out a short, cold laugh that cut through the tension like a blade. "You really are a miserable little coward, Preston," I said, shaking my head in disgust. "You think I care what happens to Chloe? You think I came here to protect the sister who spent her entire life making me a punchline? Go ahead and take her down with you. It makes absolutely no difference to my plan." I picked up the sleek silver remote from the table and pressed the final button. Behind me, the colossal digital screen shifted instantly. The financial graphs and the incriminating photographs disappeared, replaced entirely by a massive, glaring red digital clock. The numbers were immense, illuminating the dark room with a harsh crimson light. The timer read exactly 60 seconds. My legal team has an automated email scheduled to send directly to the regional director of the FBI and the lead investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission, I announced, my voice rising above the sudden frantic murmurs in the room. That email contains the fully unredacted forensic audit, complete with every single one of your offshore account numbers and property deeds. If you do not sign that contract before this timer hits 0, the email sends automatically, and your fate is permanently out of my hands. I stepped back and crossed my arms, watching the giant red numbers drop. 59, 58. The digital ticking sounded like a hammer striking an anvil in the quiet room. Marcus stared at the countdown in absolute visceral horror, while Helen began to scream at him to sign the paper. Chloe was sliding down the glass wall, weeping uncontrollably as her entire life turned to ash. 57, 56. "The choice is entirely yours, Dad," I said softly, leaning forward slightly as the massive red numbers continued to tick away. "Your precious legacy or your freedom." 55, 54. The massive red digits glared from the digital screen, painting the entire boardroom in the color of an emergency. 53, 52. Helen scrambled to her feet, her designer dress wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. She threw her hands in the air, her carefully maintained country club composure entirely gone. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are taking everything. We will lose the house, Maya. We will starve in the streets. You are condemning your own mother to poverty just to prove a point. You cannot take the company. Your father built this from nothing." I kept my eyes locked on the digital clock. 45, 44. I did not even look at Helen when I answered. "He built it from nothing, and now he is returning it to nothing," I said smoothly. "And you will not starve, Helen. You will simply have to learn how to budget. Maybe you can cancel your country club membership and learn to shop at regular grocery stores like the people you spent your entire life looking down on." 30 seconds. The room felt like a pressure cooker. Marcus was still on his knees, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. His breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps. He looked at the single sheet of paper and the black pen. He looked at the screen. 20 seconds. "Sign it, Marcus!" Preston begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He was still pinned against the table by the security guards, but his head swiveled frantically toward his father-in-law. "Sign the paper. Do you want to die in federal prison? Do you want to wear a jumpsuit for the rest of your miserable life? Sign it right now." 15 seconds. The numbers on the screen flashed from solid red to a pulsing, frantic strobe. 10, 9, 8. With a guttural sob that sounded like a dying animal, Marcus pulled himself up. His trembling hand reached out and his thick fingers wrapped around the sleek black pen. 7, 6. He pressed the gold nib to the paper. His hand was shaking so violently that the first letter of his name was completely illegible. He wept openly, the tears falling freely onto the crisp legal document, smudging the blue ink. He signed his life away. He signed away the empire he had spent 3 decades building, all to save himself from a concrete cell. 5, 4. The moment Marcus lifted the pen, Preston lunged forward. He practically ripped the pen out of my father's hand. He did not hesitate. He did not read the terms. He scribbled his signature on the witness and transfer line, panting like a cornered dog. 3, 2. I picked up the silver remote and pressed the button. The massive digital timer vanished instantly, replaced once again by the neutral blue corporate logo of Legacy Logistics. The automated email to the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission was officially canceled. The room fell into an exhausted, heavy silence. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the 2 men who had just sold me their entire world for a single dollar bill. I reached forward and smoothly slid the contract across the polished wood. I picked it up, blew softly on the wet ink to dry it, and slipped it securely into my red leather folder. The transaction was complete. The shift in power was absolute and irreversible. I stood up from the leather chairman seat. I looked down at Marcus, who was slumping into a chair holding his face in his hands. I looked at Preston, who was leaning against the table, wiping sweat from his forehead with his coffee-stained sleeve. As the sole owner and chief executive officer of Obsidian Holdings, and now the 100% owner of Legacy Logistics, I am making my first official executive decisions, I announced. My voice was calm, crisp, and devoid of any emotion. "Marcus and Preston, your employment at this company is terminated effective immediately. You are both fired." Marcus jerked his head up, his eyes bloodshot and wide. "Fired," he whispered. "Maya, you cannot. I built this." "You bankrupt this," I corrected him sharply. "And you are done. Your corporate access is revoked. Your security badges have already been deactivated. Your company vehicles, the Mercedes and the Porsche, are currently being repossessed from the executive parking garage downstairs. You will hand over the keys before you leave this room. Furthermore, your executive pensions and severance packages are completely dissolved to cover a fraction of the $8 million you stole from this company. You are leaving here with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your backs." Preston opened his mouth to argue, but one of the security guards stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder, silencing him instantly. Then the final domino shifted. Chloe, who had been completely silent, slumped against the glass wall, slowly pushed herself up. Her flawless makeup was ruined, mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. The golden child, the sister who had spent her entire life mocking my clothes, my job, and my very existence, took a trembling step toward me. She completely ignored Preston. She knew he was finished. He was a broke, cheating criminal, and she was tying herself to a sinking ship if she defended him. Maya, she pleaded, her voice weak and shaking. Maya, please. I am divorcing him. I am leaving Preston today. I cannot be married to a man who stole from our family to buy a penthouse for a 22-year-old. But you have to help me. I have the kids. I have their private school tuition. I have the mortgage on the house. Please do not fire me. Let me keep my job as Vice President of Public Relations. I need to feed my children, Maya. You cannot leave me with nothing. I stood perfectly still, letting her beg. I watched my older sister lower her head and practically grovel at my feet. For 30 years, she had been the princess of the family, treated like royalty, while I was the invisible scapegoat. Now, the roles were permanently reversed. I looked her up and down, assessing her ruined designer dress and her tear-stained face. I let the silence stretch, ensuring that every single person in the room heard exactly what I was about to say. You can stay, Chloe, I said softly. A look of profound relief washed over her face. Oh, thank God, she breathed out, reaching a hand toward me. Thank you, Maya. I promise I will be the best vice president this company has ever seen. I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. I did not say you could stay as vice president, Chloe. I corrected her, my tone turning to pure ice. Your position as VP of Public Relations was entirely eliminated 10 minutes ago because it was a useless vanity role created by our father to make you feel important. You have zero actual corporate skills. Her face fell, the relief shattering instantly. Then what, she whispered. You said you need to feed your kids, I replied. So I am offering you a job. You can stay at Legacy Logistics as a junior dispatcher. You will be working down in the basement logistics center. You will work the night shift from midnight to 8 in the morning, taking calls from angry truck drivers and logging freight manifests. And because you are an entry-level employee with no applicable experience, you will be paid exactly minimum wage. The air inside the massive glass boardroom was incredibly thin and heavy, with the metallic scent of spilled coffee and cold sweat. Chloe stood frozen against the wall, completely unable to process the brutal reality of a minimum wage night shift. For her entire 32 years of life, she had never worked a single hard day. She had never known the feeling of aching feet or the panic of a utility bill she could not pay. Now she was facing the terrifying truth of manual labor in a dark basement logistics center just to feed her own children. She backed away from me, her eyes wide with a mixture of pure terror and absolute defeat. Preston was still slumped against the heavy mahogany table, a broken, pathetic shell of the arrogant alpha male who had walked into my building an hour ago. Marcus remained in his toppled chair, staring blindly at the empty space on the desk where his billion-dollar legacy used to be. They were completely ruined, stripped of their power, their wealth, and their unearned dignity. But Helen was not quite finished. My mother had one final, desperate card to play. For decades, she had controlled the family narrative using guilt and emotional manipulation as her primary weapons. Whenever Marcus used his financial power to crush someone, Helen would swoop in to play the wounded victim, manipulating the situation so expertly that everyone felt sorry for her instead of the person they destroyed. She looked around the boardroom, seeing her husband stripped of his empire, her golden child reduced to a minimum wage dispatcher, and her perfect, immaculate social standing completely obliterated. Helen let out a piercing theatrical wail that echoed sharply off the cold glass walls. She threw herself onto the carpeted floor, clutching her chest, as if she were suffering a massive physical heart attack. She began to sob violently, her shoulders shaking as she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks and ruined makeup. You are a monster, Maya, she screamed, her voice thick with manufactured agony. You are a cold-blooded sociopath who just destroyed her own flesh and blood. Helen continued her performance, crawling slightly forward on her knees. She wailed about how they had given me life, how they had put a solid roof over my head and expensive food on my plate. She cried loudly about how she had tried so hard to love a difficult, ungrateful daughter who only ever brought darkness and disappointment into their perfect, beautiful home. She told me that I was entirely responsible for tearing our family apart, that the absolute ruin of this legacy was my fault, and that I would die completely alone because no one could ever love someone so utterly ruthless and cruel. She begged me to look at what I had done to my father, to my sister, pleading with me to undo the contracts and return their money before our family name was dragged through the mud. I stood completely still behind the chairman desk and simply watched my mother perform. Years ago, those exact words would have absolutely broken me. I would have internalized her toxic guilt, believing that my desire for basic respect was somehow a deep character flaw. I would have apologized profusely and tried desperately to fix whatever I had supposedly broken, just to earn a tiny scrap of her affection. But standing in my boardroom, looking down at the woman who had happily watched her husband and favored children mentally abuse me for 30 years, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no pain and no residual childhood trauma. The invisible heavy chains of maternal guilt had completely dissolved into thin air. I looked at her ruined designer dress, her messy hair, and her frantic eyes, and I saw her exactly for what she was. She was not a grieving mother mourning the loss of a sacred family bond. She was a desperate, panicked woman mourning the loss of her unlimited platinum credit cards, her country club luncheons, and her superficial social status. She was terrified of having to face her wealthy friends and explain that they were now entirely bankrupt because they had fatally underestimated the daughter they threw away. I let her cry until her voice grew hoarse, and her dramatic theatrical sobs faded into pathetic, ragged whimpers. The silence returned to the room heavy and suffocating. Marcus and Chloe were watching me, holding their breath, waiting to see if the maternal guilt trip had finally cracked my armor. They were hoping for a sliver of hesitation, a sign that the old obedient and desperate Maya was still buried somewhere inside me. Instead, I slowly reached my hand into the right pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers brushed against a small piece of paper I had been carrying with me for months, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to return it. I pulled my hand out and held the object up for all of them to see. It was a single crumpled $100 bill. Marcus stared at the green paper, his bloodshot eyes widening in sudden horrified recognition. Helen stopped crying immediately, her breath catching in her throat as she realized exactly what I was holding. I looked directly at my father, my voice echoing clearly in the vast, quiet space. I told them that I remembered our last Christmas dinner together with perfect clarity. I reminded Marcus of the moment I walked into their grand dining room carrying a homemade pie, hoping for a single ounce of family warmth and acceptance. I reminded them how Marcus had taken this exact same $100 bill and thrown it directly into my pie, ruining my hard work. I repeated his exact words slowly, letting them sink into the freezing air. He had called me an absolute failure. He had told me that my small business was a pathetic joke. He had thrown his money at me and told me to buy myself a real career because I was a permanent embarrassment to the family name. I looked around the room, making dead eye contact with each of them. I told them that I had kept this crumpled bill as a daily reminder of my exact place in their world. I explained that I had taken his fatherly advice to heart. I had gone out and bought myself a real career. I had used my pathetic joke of a business to buy their entire corporate empire. I took a slow, deliberate step around the mahogany table, walking toward my mother, who was still kneeling weakly on the floor. I held the crumpled $100 bill loosely between my fingers. I did not raise my voice, and I did not show a single trace of anger. I simply looked down at the broken people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I let go of the bill. It fluttered slowly through the air, drifting back and forth in the silent room until it landed softly right at Helen's knees. "Take it and buy a burger," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of all emotion. "Your failure energy is ruining the mood of my boardroom." I signaled to the head of my security team with a simple, sharp nod of my head. Two large men in immaculate dark suits immediately stepped forward and grasped Marcus by his upper arms, hauling his heavy frame to his feet. He did not even try to resist or negotiate. The fight had been completely drained out of him, leaving nothing but an empty, hollow shell of an arrogant man who suddenly realized he was entirely obsolete. Preston was next pulled away from the mahogany table by his collar, his expensive suit jacket stretching uncomfortably under the firm grip of the guards. He stumbled forward, his eyes darting wildly around the room, as if searching for a magical escape route that simply did not exist. Helen remained on the carpet for a moment longer, her trembling fingers slowly closing around the crumpled $100 bill I had dropped at her knees. She clutched it tightly against her chest as a female security officer gently but firmly helped her stand. Chloe followed them silently, looking completely numb to the world, her mind still trapped in the terrifying reality of a midnight dispatch shift in a windowless basement where she would actually have to work for her survival. I watched without a single ounce of pity as my security team marched my biological family out of the penthouse boardroom. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind them, sealing away 30 years of emotional abuse and toxic manipulation forever. They were escorted into the private executive elevator for the very last time. I could only imagine the suffocating silence of that descent as the digital floor indicator counted down their spectacular fall from grace floor by floor. When they reached the grand marble lobby, they were not greeted with the usual bowing and scraping from the reception staff. Instead, they were marched directly past the front desk and pushed out through the heavy revolving glass doors into the harsh reality of the outside world. The freezing city wind whipped against them, instantly chilling them to the bone. Marcus instinctively patted his pockets, looking for the keys to his luxury company vehicle, before remembering that his beloved car had already been repossessed and his corporate accounts were frozen solid. They were completely stranded on the cold concrete sidewalk of the busy financial district. Helen shivered in her ruined designer dress, wrapping her arms around herself as pedestrians pushed past them, completely unaware that they were walking past a fallen corporate dynasty. Preston paced back and forth near the curb, desperately trying to hail an expensive black car service on his phone, before realizing his personal credit cards had likely already been declined. They had absolutely no choice but to walk 2 blocks down the street and stand under the plastic shelter of a public municipal bus stop, waiting for public transit, alongside the very working-class people they had spent their entire lives mocking and exploiting. I stood perfectly still at the floor-to-ceiling glass window of my boardroom, looking down at the busy city street far below. From this incredible height, the people on the sidewalk looked like tiny, insignificant ants rushing through their meaningless daily routines. I easily spotted the 4 figures huddled together at the corner bus stop, their expensive clothes looking completely ridiculous in the harsh afternoon light. They looked so incredibly small and utterly powerless. I placed my hands flat against the cool glass and took a long, deep breath, letting the pure, unadulterated silence of the room wash over me. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of regret or sorrow, but I found absolutely nothing. There were no tears threatening to spill from my eyes. There was no heavy guilt weighing down my conscience. The toxic shadows that had haunted my childhood and shadowed my adult life had been completely eradicated. I had surgically removed the infection from my life, and the only thing left behind was a profound, beautiful sense of peace. The empire Marcus had built on a foundation of greed and familial destruction was now entirely mine to cleanse and rebuild into something ethical and strong. I slowly turned away from the window and faced the massive mahogany table. The room was no longer filled with the suffocating presence of arrogant thieves and manipulative narcissists. Instead, the heavy wooden doors opened, and my true team began to file into the room. These were the brilliant, diverse executives from Obsidian Holdings, the dedicated people who had stood by my side and helped me build my own fortune from absolute scratch. They were not connected to me by a random accident of genetics or a shared last name. They were connected to me by years of shared struggles, mutual respect, and unwavering trust. My chief operating officer, a brilliant woman who had faced her own battles with corporate discrimination, gave me a warm, knowing smile as she took the seat previously occupied by my father. My lead financial analyst, a young prodigy who had helped me track every single one of Preston's fraudulent offshore transfers, opened his laptop with quiet, professional efficiency. My legal counsel, who had drafted the flawless takeover documents, nodded to me in silent congratulation. This was my chosen family. They looked at me not with the condescending judgment I had endured for decades, but with absolute genuine admiration and unwavering loyalty. I walked over to the head of the table and took my rightful place in the high-backed leather chairman's seat. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer and looked at the faces of the loyal team surrounding me. The journey to this exact moment had been incredibly painful, filled with sleepless nights and constant battles against my own self-doubt, but the reward was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. Respect is not inherited, it is taken, I thought to myself, as I opened the first clean corporate dossier of our new era. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I sat back in my massive chair, feeling the incredible weight and power of my new position settling over me like a protective cloak. The toxic past was permanently dead and buried, shivering on a cold sidewalk far below us. I picked up my pen, ready to rebuild this broken empire into something spectacular entirely on my own terms. The screen cuts to black,